Hi, I'm Laura Lee Siemens and welcome back to our Bible study. We are going through Daniel and we are on to Daniel chapter 8. Now, yesterday we tackled Daniel chapter 7, and remember I said that's a chapter that people get a little bit scary about and it's not covered as often as the first 6 chapters. Daniel chapter 7 is just a beginning. Daniel chapter 8 gets even more difficult. But remember, once we summed up Daniel chapter 7, it wasn't that hard. Let's do a quick review. Remember, we had Daniel, the 4 winds came and divided the great sea, and then out of that came the animals. We had the lion with the eagle's wings, which represented Babylon. We had the bear leaning to one side, which was the Medes and Persians, with the 3 ribs in his mouth, which was the 3 nations that they conquered. And then we had the leopard, which was the super fast animal. It had the 4 heads and the 4 wings, which was Alexander the Great and the 4 generals that took over after he died. And then we had the horrible, hideous beast that had no animal, couldn't be described as any animal that exists that we know of except for just a beast. It had iron teeth, and then it had the 10 horns, and out of the 10 horns came this little horn, which plucked out 3 of the horns, and then out of that came the little horn had the eyes, the ever-seeing eye, you could see everything, and the mouth that spoke pompous words. And then we went to the throne, which is the courtroom, and the throne of God, and the dominion was taken away from the first 3 animals, but the beast was killed and thrown into the fire, and then Jesus came, and dominion was given to him forever, to rule forever. All right, so that was Daniel chapter 7. Now we are on to Daniel chapter 8. Now we're going to start off with right at the beginning again. I'm going to read the very beginning of it and see if you can remember from what we did yesterday. So, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me. So, he's being really specific here about when this vision came. So, it was in the 3rd year of King Belshazzar. So, this would be, 2 years after the last vision. And he's having another one. So remember we talked about why that's important, because there are people who try to say that this part of Daniel was written way in the future, Daniel didn't write it, and that it's more of a history looking back than prophecy, future looking forward. But Daniel was very specific. This was his dream. This exact time that he did it, he had been in his 60s, and King Belshazzar was ruling, and it was the 3rd year of ruling. So very specific there. All right, also a really after you read Daniel chapter 8, after we talk about this, you go back and read it, also read Matthew chapter 24, because Jesus speaks about this chapter when he is here on earth. He is talking about things that happen in Daniel chapter 8. So this is why we have to study all of the Bible, right? And don't leave out the parts that are hard, because later when we're reading Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Gospels, and you want to fully understand what he is talking about, you need to understand Daniel chapter 8, which might be possibly one of the hardest chapters in all of the Bible to understand. Although I guess if you went through like Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and all those are harder. Okay, so where is he? It says here in verse 2, I saw in the vision as it happened while I was looking, and then he talks about where he was, and he lifts up all these places. So you can actually go on a map and you could look this up. So he was in present day Iran. So he was about 230 miles east from Babylon. So that is where this is taking place. And he sees in his vision this ram with 2 horns, and one horn is higher than the other horn. So this ram it has 2 horns, one is higher than the other horn, and it comes and it tackles and it destroys everything, and any animal that goes up against it, it defeats it. So then all of a sudden while he's thinking about this, and while I'm considering this, all of a sudden this male goat comes from the west. And this goat, its feet don't touch the ground, which is an example that's just moving so fast that its feet aren't touching the ground. So it comes and it fights against the ram that has the horns. But it's so powerful that it actually destroys the ram, and then no one can stop this goat because it is so powerful. But it also has this large horn, so this one really large horn. But then the large horn is broken, and then in its place comes these 4 little horns. So let's think this like what he's seeing. So he sees the ram with the 2 horns, and one's bigger than the other one, and it's destroying everything. And then out of nowhere comes this goat that's running so fast, it's like its feet aren't even touching the ground, and it has this huge horn, and it like completely, utterly destroys this ram. Like there is no chance. Ram has completely defeated. But then the goat with the big horn, its horn is broken, and then in its place comes 4 horns. All right, and then out of those 4 horns comes a little horn. And the little horn grows great towards the south and the east and the glorious land. So the glorious land is Israel. And then it tries actually to go, to cast out the host of the heavens, this little horn. And it has a great army. So while he's standing there and he's seeing this, Daniel turns to the one who is speaking, or he hears one who is speaking, and he asks, how long will this vision concerning the sacrifices and the transgressions of desolation? We're going to talk about that in a little bit. How long is it going to be? And the one who's speaking says it'll be for 2,300 days, which is 6 years and 4 months. So as that's happening, Daniel looks up and he sees someone standing in front of him who has the appearance of a man. So when he sees this man, or this person, or looks like a man standing in front of him, he just passes out, like he just falls to the ground in the presence of this. And then he hears a voice from this man standing in front of him, and the voice says, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. So he's seeing this ram and this goat and this little horn, and then all of a sudden there's a man standing in front of him, and Daniel just drops to the ground, passed out. And then he hears a voice, and the voice says, Gabriel, explain to this man what he's seeing. So Gabriel comes over and touches him and gives him strength, and he's still afraid and he's still weak. And then he is told by Gabriel all of what is happening and explains to him the vision. So now I'm going to quickly explain to you the vision. So just so you have an overview, just what happened, like the story first, right? So we have the ram comes in, it's got 2 horns, one's bigger than the other one, and it's just tackling everything. Then comes in a goat with 1 huge horn, completely, utterly destroys the ram. Then the goat's horn is broken and 4 horns come in its place. And then a little horn comes. The little horn is really bad, has this huge army, and it tries to knock down the stars from the sky. And then a man appears in front of Daniel. Daniel loses everything, passes out. The voice says, Gabriel, explain to him what happened. Gabriel comes over and touches Daniel, gives him strength, and so then he can explain to him what happens. It says at the very end he is faint and sick for a couple of days. He's actually sick after this for a couple of days. He can't even stand up and go to work for the king again for a couple of days. Okay, so here is the explanation. So if you just jumped in and read this chapter without studying the first 7 chapters, this would be completely, you'd have no clue what to do, right? So, but we have read Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7. So maybe you have some clues about what's happening here. So there's a ram who has 2 horns. So this is the Medes and the Persians. And you will notice that one horn is bigger than the other one. So that is like the bear, and he is like up on one side because one side is stronger than the other side. And that is because the Medes and Persians worked together to conquer the world, but the Persians were the more powerful. And the Persians are Iran today. I don't even know if you realize this, but if you went to Iran, the people there are Persian, because that is in Queen Esther. When you read that story, that's all Iran. So the present day Iran, they are the Persians. Okay, so the Medes and Persians come, and the Persians are more powerful. And remember we talked about yesterday how they conquered the world just by the mere size of their military. And that's how they were so dominant. So they thought no one could destroy them. But there was this man named Alexander the Great. Now, I told you yesterday we're going to talk a little bit more about Alexander the Great, and today we're going to. So Alexander the Great's dad's name was Philip. He was King Philip. King Philip was assassinated, and that meant that at age 19, Alexander the Great took over the empire. But when he was born, there's people who say that they saw visions. There's all those like mystic things about his life story, saying he was going to be great and rule the world. And so his dad right from birth was getting him ready to be this great ruler. So he was actually taught in school by Aristotle. So Aristotle, which if you know a little bit about history and about philosophy, Aristotle was obviously known even today as a great teacher. So that was Alexander the Great's teacher, Aristotle. So at age 19, he takes over, and he is just an absolutely brilliant military leader. And he just begins conquering the world. So at that time of the Medes and Persians, it was King Darius III, or King Darius III, Darius, however we say it. The third is the one in charge of the Medes and Persians. This, by the way, happens 200 years after this is written. So that in itself is pretty cool. So he comes and he takes over and he fights. And there's a battle that even today, after all these years, I had the name of that written down here, the name of the battle. Oh, Gaugamela. So there's 3 battles that Alexander the Great had with the Medes and Persians. This one, Gaugamela battle, which is the 3rd one. Even today, if you study military, this is a battle that you still study today because is so amazing that Alexander the Great just completely wiped out the Medes and Persians with this battle. So Alexander the Great takes over, and now he is really ruling the world. But when he's in his 30s, he gets sick, and he's actually in a castle or in a palace in Babylon with the flu, and he dies, and he has no offspring. So that is the horn of the ram is broken. So that's Alexander the Great dies. And because he has no children, his kingdom is divided amongst his 4 generals. So then the horn of the ram breaks, the horn of the goat breaks, and then there's 4 more horns that come in place. So those are his 4 generals. And then we have the little horn. Okay, I'm going to give you 2 possible ways of looking at the little horn. And personally, I believe both of them could be accurate, even both of them accurate at the same time. So some people believe the little horn was a guy named Antiochus. And I know I'm not saying that right. As good as it's going to get. Okay, so he comes to power when Alexander the Great is in charge of Greece. Then Alexander the Great actually treats the Jewish people very well. But Antiochus comes into power, and he is horrible. Absolutely hates the Jewish people. He wants to destroy them, and specifically, he wants to end their faith, and he wants to end any of their writings. So he tries to find all of their writings, which would be our Old Testament, and destroy it. Now, if we go back and look at Jewish history, so there was Solomon's temple, which was built, and that was the one that was destroyed. Remember, we talked about that at the very beginning of Daniel, when the Babylonians came in. So that temple was destroyed, and the things were taken, like the gold and the silver and all that was taken. So we learned about that. There's a second temple that was built, and he actually goes in and he sacrifices a pig on the altar. Now, Jewish people aren't allowed to have pig, so that's already a desolation. That's what they talk about here. But even more so than that, when the Jewish people sacrifice a lamb is representation of Jesus. Jesus calls himself the Lamb of God, right? He is the Lamb. So the lamb had to be perfect, had to be without any blemish, and the killing of the lamb, and the shedding of the blood of the lamb is how they had their sins forgiven. So when Jesus said he is the lamb that takes away the sins of the world, when he died on the cross, he was that sacrifice. And our sins went on to him, so there didn't need to be any more sacrifices. But the Jewish people continued to do sacrifices up until this point when this guy came and ended it. So when he sacrificed a pig, then that was like Jesus was the pig instead of Jesus being the lamb. So it is obvious, and he was doing it very purposely. So he hated the Jewish people so much that he did that. So then it was 6 years and 4 months before the Maccabees were able to come in and cleanse the temple. And that's the story of Hanukkah, which the Jewish people are celebrating right now. If you are watching this while I'm recording it, and you're not watching it way in the future, but that is the story of Hanukkah, when the Maccabees came in and put up and cleanse the temple. But the cleansing of the temple, they needed the oil to last for 8 days, and they only had enough for 1 day, but then it lasted all of the days. So that is that story. So some people say that is what's being talked about right here, is that the little horn is that person. Other people say that the little horn is the Antichrist, because that is who the little horn was the chapter before. And he also is going to hate the Jewish people. And he also, it says here, it talks about the things that little horn is going to do. He's going to say, he's going to be tell people he's as great as the Prince of the host. So he's as great as Jesus. He's going to cast down the stars and trample them, which is an example of Satan, when Satan fell from the sky and took some of the angels with him. Some people also say this is just an example of him just destroying Christians or destroying followers of God. So all of these things, both the Antichrist, we look at the future for the Antichrist, that's what he's going to do. And also that is what this guy did. So I think really both of them could be accurate. Also, if we look through history, there are people who do a lot of the things that the Antichrist is supposed to do. So Hitler did a lot of the stuff that Antichrist was supposed to do. There's a lot of, like, Stalin was a horrible person. So there's a lot of people who fit many of the descriptions as far as the character of the Antichrist. And I think they are foreshadowing the Antichrist. I think when he comes, though, he will be obviously so much more evil that we'll go, oh, well, yeah, clearly that was the Antichrist. But there was obviously a lot of very evil people in history already. And fighting against Jewish people tends to be an evil thing to do. So just don't do that. Don't speak evil about the Jewish people in general. But just know, if you do speak evil about the Jewish people, you're right up there with the worst people in history. Okay, so then who is standing there in front of him? I believe that is Jesus. And because he says he's the Son of Man. And so just seeing him, just being in his presence, makes Daniel go unconscious. And then he calls out for Gabriel, and then Gabriel comes, who there's a couple angels mentioned in the Bible, Gabriel and Michael. So Gabriel is here, and he comes and he touches him and gives him the strength. And then he explains here the Medes and Persians and the kingdom of Greece and the horn and all of those things. And then after Daniel wakes up from this vision, he is sick. He can't go to work for a couple of days because of the vision, and then he writes it up. So that is Daniel chapter 8. So what can we take away from all of that? Whew. Like, first of all, you might have to read this a few times. Just remember the basic story of what happens here. We have the ram with the 2 horns, which is the Medes and Persians. So one horn is bigger. The ram conquers everything. Then we have, and that is the Medes and Persians. And then we have the goat, which runs really fast. Like, its feet aren't even touching the ground. That is Alexander the Great. He destroys the Medes and Persians, which shocks everyone because he's so young. He has a huge horn. That's Alexander the Great. Or I guess the goat is Greece. The huge horn is Alexander the Great. He dies suddenly, so the horn is broken off. 4 horns come in its place. That is the 4 generals of Alexander the Great. And then after that happens, the little horn comes up, which could be a representation of the Antichrist coming later in the future, or it could be this guy Antiochus, who hates the Jewish people, tries to destroy them, tries to wipe them off the face of the earth, tries to destroy their writings, which is the Old Testament, tries to end their faith, and by doing that, he sacrifices a pig in the temple. The temple isn't cleaned then for 6 years and 4 months, which is when the Maccabees come, and when we celebrate, or when the Jewish people celebrate Hanukkah. I don't know, we should celebrate Hanukkah too. I actually don't really understand why we don't celebrate Hanukkah, because it's an example of something that God did that was really amazing for his people. But anyway, that's Hanukkah. And then a man suddenly appears before Daniel. Daniel passes out. The man says, Gabriel, explain to him what's going on. Gabriel touches Daniel, gives him strength, and then explains to him the kingdoms. And then Daniel wakes up, and he's sick, and he can't go to work for a couple of days. See, not that hard. Easy peasy. So go ahead, read through this. And then also remember to go and read also Matthew chapter 24, because that is where Jesus talks about this. All right. Please don't give up on the book of Daniel. If you're thinking, okay, now this is just getting too hard, don't give up on it. Keep going. Tomorrow we're going to do Daniel chapter 9. And Daniel chapter 9 gets pretty awesome. And we're going to learn a lot about prayer. All right. I'm Laura Lee Siemens, and that was Daniel chapter 8. See you tomorrow. We're doing Bible study.